The next thing that we want to talk about is the kind of team dynamics that happens within the supervisory team. And there's lots of aspects to consider. For example, it matters that the supervisory team will have a kind of supervisory culture, a supervision culture. And I see at least two kinds of supervision culture, a type 1 and a type 2. I'll define them in a minute. Then I want to consider some issues around team composition and also look at team cohesion and coherence. First up is that the experience of HDR candidature of the candidate changes over time. And an important aspect of a successful supervision is that each of the interactions that you have with the student leave the student with an overall positive perspective. But this experience of candidature plays out against a backdrop of two mutually interacting processes as far as I can see. There's a prior existing and an ongoing development of an institutional supervision culture. That's the particular kinds of institutions that we find ourselves working in and their history, and also the unfolding team dynamics that goes on during supervision. And that's a consequence of particular supervisory team composition and the interactions with each candidate playing out during the supervision. So the first supervision culture I want to talk about is what I call a type 1 supervision culture. And these are often associated with engineering and science, and they're strongly hierarchical in nature. The kind of candidature that happens in this kind of type 1 supervision culture is that you may have a senior professor that runs some kind of institute or lab, some associate professors under them, organising work into a series of work packages. Often those work packages are part of a funded research project to which the PhDs are assigned. So the senior professor may delegate work to lower ranked academic supervisors who do the actual supervision. And the work may actually be in teams. So it's possible to have situations, I've heard of situations where there are several teams doing work which is basically in some kind of competitive relationship with each other. This can be very productive. You can produce a lot of material, but it can also lead to hostility and dysfunction within teams. So in this kind of supervision culture, the senior academic has secured the grant and they'll probably be on every paper as a consequence, and not unreasonably. But there will be or can be issues of whose intellectual property are we dealing with. There's also the potential for the HDR candidate to be exploited in this kind of research supervision culture. Type 2 supervision cultures, on the other hand, are often found in humanities and business faculties, and they possess a different kind of supervisory culture. In Type 2 supervision cultures, you can have groups of HDR students involved in broadly similar work that is complementary. These candidates may even work as part of the same research group, but unlike Type 1 cultures, the multidisciplinary nature of their work means that they probably can't really share much more than core literature or some common set of methods. And in some cases, these complementary fields are relatively unrelated to each other. So candidates may share, at most, some literature. In business faculties in particular, you have, and arts and humanities, more diverse options theoretically and methodologically. And this means that there can be some real and close disciplinary differences that promote a kind of tribalism between HDR candidates, even if they're working within the same school or the same group. Effectively, Type 2 supervision cultures have HDR candidates whose topics more or less isolate them from the possibility of the kind of exchanges that may be possible in Type 1 supervision cultures. Now, I've characterised these Type 1 and Type 2 cultures as somehow extreme, in an extreme way, I think. The reality is somewhere in the middle. But both of these cultures can be good, both of them can be bad, but they'll be different from each other. When it comes to team composition, it's another important aspect of the supervision team dynamics. Effective teams should have all of the tools required to complete all of the tasks needed in the dissertation. So an effective supervision team should have access to a range of theories, methodological knowledges, skills, and so on. Not everybody has to know everything, but everybody must be able to engage to some extent with what other members of the team are capable of providing. It is possible that only one supervisor out of a team is really engaged in a topic, and this is one problem with having highly specialised individuals within teams. It's somehow a risk that you can have experts, but they really only are a part of one aspect, one small sliver of the larger HDR project. Another dimension to this team dynamics is team cohesion. That is, how well do these supervisors work together with a HDR candidate? You can see team cohesion, or at least experience it, in a number of different ways. How unified does the team think of itself? How compatible are the team members? I have been in supervision teams where the team members are highly diverse, very different, and yet still are able to behave in a compatible and personable way. Some supervisors have a collaborative shared history with others, which sometimes makes it easier. A kind of shorthand and a kind of quick interchange or a quick development of ideas can happen because of that shared history. Sometimes supervisors are literally working together, so members of a supervisory team may be actually engaged in research together themselves. Another consideration is, does each member bring a useful set of skills? I've seen team cohesion suffer when it's felt that one or two of the members of the team or a member of the team don't really bring a useful skill to play. Team cohesion reveals itself in the attendant communication that takes place, which is why we're always a bit sensitive to it. We can tell when it's not quite gelling. One way of looking at team cohesion is through the communication that's taking place in specific supervisory contexts, and we refer to that as situational context. So some of the things to look out for are how particular kinds of roles and role relationships are worked through or expressed in the communication that flows during supervisory sessions. One way of looking at this is by looking at tenor in communication, that is, the social roles and relationships. We can look at tenor from the point of view of contact. How frequent is the contact between the supervision team and the candidate, or between members of the supervision team and the candidate? So this is referred to as contact. And we could have frequent contact or occasional contact. And we know from experience that at times, particularly early on in the candidature, it's advantageous to have frequent contact with a candidate. Towards the end of the candidature, when the dissertation is being finalised, there's perhaps less need for that contact. Another important dimension of social roles and relationships is power. Is the communication laden with implicit, unequal social relations of power being expressed in the communication? Or is the team promoting a kind of equality between the candidate and the supervisory team? I quite like it when we don't need to explicitly talk about who's more powerful in the room. It just seems to get in the road. The other indicator which is easy to pick up on relates to the comment about emotional intelligence earlier, is that of affective involvement. What kind of emotional involvement appears to be going on in the team? And obviously the kind of emotional involvement we want are happy emotions. But at times, particularly when things are fraught, we can have less positive affective involvement. Okay. We can have constructive communication settings where supervision team and the supervisor are working well together, and we can have detrimental ones where there's perhaps manipulation on the part of the HDR student or coercion on the part of the supervisors. We always are trying to reach constructive communication settings. Another dimension to supervision team dynamics is team cohesion. That's the ability of supervisors to contribute to the project in terms of their domain expertise, and also the ability to communicate in a complementary fashion about how their particular specialisation can be of use to others in the team. Team cohesion manifests itself in several ways. We could ask the following questions. Do the skills of the team match the project requirements? Can the team members adapt what they know to what is needed in the project? Are there any missing skills required to complete the project? That might involve bringing an additional person in, perhaps as an advisor or perhaps as a full-time member of the supervision team. Can the HDR candidate make up any skills deficits themselves? So team cohesion reveals itself in the intended communication as well as the range of language resources that are used during each communication session.